So, you're ready to learn fertility awareness, but not sure where to start. I have cultivated several excellent resources for you, including my free online course, FAM 101. FAM 101 takes you through the basics of the fertility awareness method, and I walk you through what you need to know about the three main fertile signs: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to access this amazing resource today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 271. Welcome to the 271st episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I have a great episode for you today. In today's episode, I'm sharing my interview with April and Amy of the Shameless Sex podcast, and we dive into some important details of female sexuality. We talk about some of the myths about female sexuality, and one of the topics that I love to talk about is just the narrative of what sex is supposed to look like and how limiting that definition can be. When you use fertility awareness as your primary method of birth control and you find yourself having to find creative ways to manage your fertile window, it could really be an opportunity to expand your definition of what constitutes sex. Often we think of sex as simply penetrative sex, penis and vagina sex, but when you are, again, forced to creatively manage your fertile window, and essentially during your fertile window, if you are using fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy, then there's no, penis and vagina sex where he is ejaculating inside of your body. And that leaves a few options. Some couples opt for condoms. Some couples opt for complete abstinence, like no sexual activity whatsoever. Some couples opt for withdrawal. And some couples opt for alternative sex. So finding other ways to be sexual and intimate without actually inserting a penis into the vagina. So in today's episode, we're talking about sex, questioning the definition of it, and just really getting into a really exciting and interesting discussion about sex and about pleasure and even about the importance of taking time for yourself and prioritizing your pleasure and why that's important and all of those great topics. So really excited to share today's episode with you. So I'm really excited to be here with Amy Baldwin and April Lampert from the Shameless Sex podcast. We have connected a few times. I've been on your show a few times, and I was super excited to have the opportunity to have you both on at the same time. So I'll do a super quick read of your bio, but I want you to share with us your history and background and as sexperts. I had to. So Amy is a sex and relationship coach, a certified sex educator, and lead educator for Uberlube, as well as co-owner of a mother-daughter-owned pleasure boutique called Pure Pleasure Shop. Amy has a passion for promoting shame-free, pleasure-focused sexuality education while emphasizing the deep emotional and energetic forces behind great sex and intimate connection. And April has been educating people about sexual pleasure, health, and wellness at a global scale for the past 9 years. She travels internationally as VP of Hot Octopuss, an innovative pleasure product company. April was voted Women of the Year in the adult industry and continues to climb to new heights as the boss queen that she is. And of course, they are the hosts of the Shameless Sex podcast, which is amazing. And I'm really excited to have you. So thank you so much for coming.
Amy added that boss queen part for me, by the way. I didn't, that's not self-proclaimed, but thank you. It's so great to be here with you, Lisa. We love you.
Thank you for having us. And I also just realized you've been teaching now because we created that bio, 2 years ago? Yeah. So she's been teaching for 11, 12 years now.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when people read your bios to you because it's always like, oh, wait, I got to update that. There's more stuff I got to put in there.
Thanks. Now we got to go edit.
Yeah. But yes, so share with us how you got into the field, essentially, of sex education. I'm sure we all, everyone's dying to know, but how did you get into the field? And of course, what inspired you to focus on this area?
So this is Amy here, and people often confuse us because we're Amy and April. We've had people refer to us both as the Amys or the Aprils, but we're I am Amy.
And we have the deep voices that are like this.
The podcast voices. So I'm 34 now. When I was 18 years old, I took a human sexuality class at a community college and had a professor who made the topic the most dry topic possible. They had actually said that they had been celibate for 10 years and they were still preaching the diaphragm to 18-year-olds. And that's not even what Planned Parenthood doesn't even offer the diaphragm to actually most people these days. And yet I still loved every single second of it. Like I was the textbook. I just couldn't get enough of it. And I realized, and I already kind of had a little bit of a knack for talking openly about sexuality. I was that go-to person for my friends and was raised with very little shame around sex. My parents just told me when I was younger, when you want to become sexually active, come to us. We'll get you on birth control if you want. I know the birth control thing. I know what podcast I'm on, but it helped me to know that I could come to them and that it was something that was a healthy thing for me to do. And then I decided if I'm going to go to school for a long time, I might as well go to school for something I love. So I chose human sexuality, went to San Francisco State, majored in psychology, minored in human sexuality, and went on a field trip there in San Francisco to see their local sex-positive sex shop, Good Vibrations, and called my mom right after. And I said, we should open a sex shop like this in Santa Cruz. And 2 years later, we did. And through that, selling sex toys with my mom's a wonderful being. We hired April, actually. April and I were close friends already, and we hired her as our first manager there, and she'll share more about that journey. So that's how she came in and how I kind of came into this side of the industry. From there, became a certified sex educator, teaching human sexuality classes in adult stores or sometimes universities, and became a sex and relationship coach so that I could work privately with clients, which was already starting to happen, but I needed the formal training. And then went on to go do so many other little trainings on, Tantra, to now I'm in a Hakomi training, which is a holistic psychotherapy, has nothing to do with sex and yet still fits in. And now the podcast. So I wear many hats. My passion obviously is around sexuality, around inspiring people to decrease or work with shame as much as possible around sex so that they can take off the layers of armor that is holding them back from being who they really are as a sexual being. And April, who are you?
That was nice though, Amy. That was a great exit and intro. So April here. I started, as Amy said, I studied law, by the way. And I realized that for lack of a better way to put it, a bad liar. And I'm like, lawyers, tend to have to find evidence. And I just loved researching and that aspect of law, but I felt like it wasn't for me. Amy offered me this amazing managerial role at her sex shop. And slowly I understood that you became this almost like this sounding board for them and their sexuality, and helping them find orgasms through talking to them about sex toys in the sex shop. And I naturally was really good at it. And I didn't know. I grew up in the conservative Midwest. I never talked about sex with my mom. I went to Planned Parenthood by myself and got birth control. I didn't know your methodology, the fertility method back then. I probably wasn't responsible enough at the time either to do that. I grew up really scared of talking about sex. So this experience working at Pure Pleasure opened my eyes to what people are so connected to, and that's their sexuality, or they wanted to be connected to, whether it was with a partner or with themselves, I'm 66 years old. I've never had an orgasm before. I'm like, you're kidding. Let's help you with that. So I worked, with Amy. We'd go to trade shows and I ended up getting a job with a manufacturer, a very sex positive manufacturer, and ended up traveling all over the world talking about sex toys and sex with that company they were out of Germany. In it, I didn't know I was going to be as good as I was at once about sex, and people, I loved it. And then Hot Octopuss, we're a London-based company, so I still travel all around the world. And I started this podcast in 2017, Shameless Sex Podcast, about different things. Amy has, this certification. I just have I like to be humorous and add a little light fun to a lot of things. And I learned so much from our relationship, her and I. And Shameless Sex has been probably one of my favorite journeys so far. So, and we're just consistently getting such great feedback that we don't want to stop. So there you go.
Well, thank you for that. Because part of me is kind of legitimately like, first of all, I didn't know when I was growing up. I grew up in a really small town, Canada. But I didn't know that was a thing, that you could grow up and be I guess I shouldn't say I didn't completely know, because, I grew up listening to the Sunday night sex show. So for anyone who's like of my generation who listened to Sue Johansson, like I was like in my bedroom really quietly by the radio. Mm-hmm. So I guess on some level I knew that was a thing, but it wasn't a common thing. So it's kind of like, how did you grow up to do that? Like, what brought you into that? So that's really cool. So let's just jump right into it. There's a couple things. I mean, we talked a little bit before we jumped into our interview, but I just want to kind of jump right into the shame, since you brought it up, both of you, in your introductions. And we don't really have to give a lot of context. I think everybody knows that that's a huge just part of sexuality because of the interesting history, even the religious history around sex and how we view it. And as a culture, how, depending on where you live in the world, but in North America, it's not as open, as other places in the world. What really comes to mind is, I follow your Instagram feed and I'm always liking everything. But one of the things that really struck me lately was, so you can correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but you had kind of like a campaign where you were showing images and it was almost like a confessional. And so people were putting up just their thoughts and experiences around sex. And it was really moving because you can see everyone's experiences are so different. And there's a lot of kind of shocking experiences. Even what you mentioned, April, the 60-year-old that comes in and shares with you that they've never had an orgasm. And you're like, whoa, we need to fix that. But this is real life. And these are some of the experiences people have had. So I would just, from your seat, I can't even imagine all the different experiences that you've had and the things that people have shared with you. But what are some of the top challenges that you support people with, and also around the shame? What have been your experiences?
Well, one thing I thought of as you were speaking was part of another reason why I got into this industry was my own confusion with my own body and how it worked and the orgasms I was having or not having, and like, why is this not working here? And what does this mean? And everyone says it should happen this way. And that my own questions really are probably half of why I got into this. It was also because I enjoyed the topic, but I certainly did not have it all figured out. Still don't, everyone, still don't, and have it all figured out, and probably never will. And the reason why that is because no amount of knowledge I have will ever, it's just, I'm constantly changing. And no amount of knowledge I have will ever pertain to everyone, because my body and my sexual experience is entirely different than everyone else's. And so I think that's one of the main things that we see both for ourselves. I can speak for myself. I think April's in the same boat. And a lot of the people that we work with or that are, our listeners, would be that it's this idea that sex should happen one way, that our sexual life should be this one thing, and if it's not, we're broken. And even though we don't say it that way, you don't hear, if you're not multi-orgasmic and you only orgasm from a penis inside of your vaginal canal, and if you don't do that, then you're broken. That kind of is a little, it's the undertone, and it's so hurtful to people. And I think especially women, are in I can speak for North America, we're not awesome like Norway, where they can have vibrator ads on the air. And I think that their sex education is much better there. We don't teach about pleasure here. So people grow up thinking that there's something wrong with them because what they see is on mainstream media, and it's these people like having, or in porn, someone like vigorously, ferociously rubbing their clitoris, and they have these mind-blowing orgasms, and they're like, my body doesn't work that way. There's something wrong with me. So that's what we see is really people trying to fit into this false idea of what sexuality should be, and as if we should all be the same thing, instead of looking at ourselves as, well, yeah, we all look different from one another, so why wouldn't we think that our insides and our desires for sex should also be completely different too? So, and that was that campaign you're speaking to, is inviting, we called it our myth and shame busting campaign for female sexuality. We didn't really have a great title for it. We should have, we're doing, I don't know when this is coming out, but we're doing a Masturbation May one. It's a self-pleasure 30-day challenge that we have all the hashtags and everything figured out. So you can check out our Instagram at Shameless Sex Podcast for that. And if this is later than that, go check it out. It'll be fun. But it was inviting female identified folks to share anonymously with that photo that they hand wrote something on a piece of paper over their faces about something about their sexual experience that they either felt shame about or they thought was kind of that people didn't think was true for women. So one person is like, I've cheated on every partner I've been with. Another person said, I've faked every orgasm I've had. Another person says, I love sex. I think about it 20 times a day. Another person says, I have very little desire. I very rarely, if never, feel horny these days. And it really allowed people, like you were talking about, to see, wow, it's so different for everyone. And it's always changing. And like you were saying, and we got so much feedback from people that were saying, thank you for showing me that I'm normal, that diversity is the normal. Do you have anything you want to add to that as well?
Well, I think the big piece of that whole campaign and what we were inviting folks to do is just out some of their deepest, maybe shameful things that they probably won't share. And I actually outed that I had cheated, which stemmed a lot of like interesting comments and feedback. And some people did get angry about that and judgment, right? And it's something that I did wear as, shameful, as almost like part of my identity. Like I did this terrible thing. And that is a part of kind of, I don't know, of what our goal is with the podcast is to help people relate to their shame and take off those pieces. And that campaign, we actually got shadow banned on Instagram, which was so we learned about what shadow banning was from this campaign too. We were like, what's happening? We weren't allowed to post anything. So our account was live. We could still get followers. However, Instagram had put what they call a shadow ban on our account, meaning we weren't able to make additional posts. It was like, I have my eyes on you via IG. That was what they were saying to us. So we
were too provocative. That's the belief, is that because we were pushing the envelope and some of the posts that people said had the word masturbation in it. And oh my gosh.
That was a sarcastic gasp.
Oh yes. Yeah, I knew that. And it was interesting for us that we got that for promoting the diversity of female sexuality and pleasure. It was sex positive. And we were getting banned, but you'd still see male-owned accounts that was just like booties twerking. They're still fine, but and
that kind of attests to what we're talking about, where pleasure is kind of ignored, and words like masturbation are treated as volatile or explicit, or so I don't know. That was, I thought, really cool that we did get shadow banned. People were holding up signs. It wasn't images of booties twerking or, areolas, which aren't bad either, but Instagram wasn't comfortable with that. So I was happy though that to know that we got to them.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm sure we could go into that. I have a question. I'll try to ask it in a good way, because I feel like I'll meander a little bit. So when you're talking about the differences between us and how we're all individual, I suppose, how do I ask this question? We all know how to make men have orgasms. Like, it's pretty simple, straightforward, right? And the majority of men have orgasms the majority of the time when they have sex. Not all 100% of the time, but we know it's up there, right? It's not 5% of the time. But somehow it seems as though, I think the conversation is definitely changing. But it seems like there's this idea out there that like the female orgasm is really difficult or complicated, or even that there's something wrong with women's bodies because we can't orgasm in a certain way. So I guess the question is around, like, I get that there's individuality, but at the same time, we're like, for women who, if you are identified as female, you have the female parts, there's some degree of physiology, just like there would be some degree of physiology for the male orgasm. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, is the idea that saying that we're so individual, like, do you think that there's women who take that on and think that that means that there's something really special that needs to happen in order for me to orgasm, as opposed to the culture recognizing that female orgasm is different to male? And I'm not articulating the question properly, but I'm trying to think of how to ask it.
I kind of
formula to the woman, female, or you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, I guess it's like, I think you know what I'm trying to say.
I know Amy will have a lot to say. I'll just say briefly, I always did think that something was wrong with me because I couldn't orgasm every time I had sex, or I could only get off by using a vibrator. And I read finally, and she was on our podcast, and Amy had been referencing this book for years, and I finally got around to reading it recently. It's called Come As You Are. It is life-changing. It's an in-depth look at female sexuality, but also our anatomy. And our sexuality is based on penis owners, really. That's what, like, all the textbooks for vulvas, the research that was done, it's so interesting. So if anyone out there besides your amazing book, everyone, if you have time, read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, because it really does give this amazing account of the history of female sexuality. And it's very much based on this patriarchal society.
Short and sweet answer. We know there's not one formula for all women or all bodies. And I think that big thing that's happening again is that kind of cookie cutter model for what sexuality is April's speaking to, that our model for sexuality for the female body is very much based around the penis. What the penis likes, the vulva should like too. And what the penis likes, what we think it likes, is what porn has also kind of created, or even like Freud back in the day when he said the clitoris was the inferior orgasm. I know. And there still are people that I actually know of a woman who is calls themselves a sex positive sex educator, who still says that, who says that the ultimate orgasm is cervical and the clitoral orgasm is inferior. And I think that's so, so harmful, because the majority of female or vulva owners, they need some sort of clitoral stimulation during sex, any kind of sex, to have an orgasm. But we're still living in that era. So I think that we need to step away from that and tap deeper into us as individuals and what we want. And I can speak to a personal experience that I just had that was really, really, really powerful, which was not with a partner. It was with me actually going to a sexological body worker on Sunday, which I haven't even told you about. I'll tell her about now. Sexological body work, they're all over the world, and sexological body workers are hands-on body workers, but they stay fully clothed. It's not about them. They will touch your body, and it's all about consent. They will actually only touch you when you say, touch me here this way. I believe that's a practice. I could be wrong where that might shift a little bit. But anyways, it's all about consent. I had this experience where I noticed, and I'll just sum this up. I noticed that my body had changed in the last 2 years, that my sensation had left. I had an abortion when I was, let's say in late 2016. I got pregnant on the copper IUD, that thing. And for many reasons, I did not love that thing. And then my partner left for 2 months after that. So I had this big abandonment piece, and my body just kind of shut down. I watched it. I watched my sexuality turn off for a couple weeks, and I chose it. I remember saying, I hurt so bad. So it wasn't because of the loss of the life from the abortion. I was hurt in so much pain because my partner had left, not because of that. They were planning on leaving. And I was in so much pain. I watched my sexuality turn off, and I was like, you know what? Screw it. Let it go. I don't need this thing. And then I got stuck in it. Only 2 months later, when I wanted it back, my default had become turned off or turned down. And since then, I've been working at it and at getting it back online. And I'm using this as an example because this is normal to have our bodies change. You're pregnant and you have a child. That is a big trauma on the body that what your body goes through. It's a consensual trauma, but let's be honest, your body goes through a lot. There's a lot that changes, and therefore, if we have the choice to either fight the change or choose to work with the change. And so this is why I saw a sexological body worker was my body had shifted. The touch that I wanted shifted. My connection to my body had shifted. I knew all the heady tools of what would work, but my body did not get it. And I can read as many textbooks as I want, but my body has to get online with it as well. And in this practice, I saw that when the person that I had the session with, I had them touch different parts of my external vulva, and they weren't moving their fingers really. They would just hold a spot for a minute, and I would stay present with the sensations. And they were holding the lower part of my vaginal opening, and I just stayed very, very present. This is another thing that gets in the way for people. Presence of thinking, and also being a receiver is really hard. In this, I didn't have to give this person anything. I was just receiving. It was all about me. And it was so liberating to be like, I don't have to do anything. And also kind of sad. I was crying. So I was forgetting how often I get in my own way about that. But they were holding the base of my vaginal opening, and I felt just pleasure in my, like inside my vaginal canal around my G-spot, which was not that close to the lower part of my vaginal opening. I felt it filling with fluid as if I was going to ejaculate. I felt it, a lot of pressure. I felt it pulsating. I was like, for the first time, I felt my vaginal canal pulsating, which I haven't felt in a while. And I just saw how much subtle sensation is there in the slowness, in the presence, in the conscious touch, in the ability to receive without needing to give and think about taking care of someone, which is another thing for women, right? Mm-hmm. Caretakers, especially you straight women, and how our society and the sex in our society is not set up to tend to that, to allow space for that. And so this is the, the map that you're talking about, or the formula, but it's a complicated one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose I want to get into some of the barriers, I suppose you could say, for female enjoyment in sex, because it's not uncommon for women to go years without having orgasms, partnered or alone even. There's there's different mixed opinions even about masturbation, and a lot of women have never even had that experience of self-pleasure. Mm-hmm. And what you talked about in terms of that kind of patriarchal view of sex. And the way that we understand it. So for instance, like if I'm watching some of my favorite dramas or whatever, I have noticed a shift over the years, which is encouraging. So, back in the day, it was always very like, obviously penis focused. And it's like this really unrealistic, ridiculous, like, man has erection. He penetrates woman and she's already coming before his, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's just so amazing right off the bat. And for any human being that's ever like had sex with another human being, like the orgasm doesn't happen within like 2 seconds, so I feel like I have seen a shift depending on the type of programming you're watching. And I'm not talking about porn. I'm just talking about kind of the way popular culture is portraying it. And so I suppose it's reassuring to see more displays of men giving women pleasure in different ways to just show that it doesn't have to be like a certain script. So to find a question in there somewhere, there's something I really want to get at. And I think that you've heard me talk and you've heard me bash birth control and how it lowers libido, and how there's all these women who potentially their sexual experience is being interfered with and they're not able to enjoy the full expression of their sexuality. I'm a woman, I have lots of friends that are female, and over the years, I've just heard that conversation so many times of like, I've literally been with someone for years and I have never had an orgasm, or, I don't have an orgasm regularly in sex, but it's totally fine because it still feels good. And it's kind of what you were saying, Amy, like that you're there to give pleasure, but not necessarily to receive it. So I would just be curious as to how you've supported women to change that narrative and to kind of embrace receiving and also embrace voicing yourself, like not feeling a pressure to fake it, to, again, taking care of your partner, like so that you can actually enjoy yourself.
I think one thing that Amy said that I loved was get out of your own way, where that is something that we all tend, and I don't want to, I should say, I do that. I don't want to generalize. I definitely get in my own way, often in the bedroom, or I have all these expectations. And I think one thing that's been really helpful in my sexual journey with my partner, whom I've been with for, about 2 years, is getting out of my own way. I have all of these expectations with him, what I'm expecting when we go into this situation. And I can't expect anyone to bring me pleasure, right? I have to figure that out on my own, tune into my body. I try to breathe into my yoni space. As wooey as that sounds, it actually helps because I'm a very heady human. And hence the reason I'm like, oh, I love cannabis legality because I could get out of my head so much and try to get into my body and smoke a little cannabis. Well, that also gets me back into my head a lot of times. So I'm really working on a consistent daily basis, tuning into what's happening, the smells, the touch, the sensations. And I love using toys in the bedroom. I found it really helpful over the years. I also am trying to remove those things and only add them certain times so they're more enjoyable. And I really think tuning in to everything, it's almost like a meditation at times, closing the eyes, not thinking about, and Amy always talks about this, like what I had for breakfast. What do I have to do later on? Are the kids crying?
Well, there's a finger on my clit.
Yeah, that's not being mindful or present, but living into the moment, what you're experiencing right then. I also do find sensation play helpful because, so that means, for instance, I love being blindfolded. Because when you take away one sense, it heightens the other senses. So I find if I wear a blindfold, I can smell my partner more. I can feel his touch more. I can feel his breath on my body. And I love just tuning in to that situation more with you can do, what else? What are they called? I can't think of.
Wrist ties, you mean?
Yes, handcuffs, or I use the under the bed restraint system. So all restraint. That's what I was looking for. I'm a little slow today, Lisa. I'm sorry. So those kinds of things, taking away the use of my hands or binding my ankles. That is it. And it doesn't have to be, people get caught up in what they think kink is, that they're weird or that's scary. It can be really soft and fun and playful, and tuning into yourself is the key to finding your own sexuality. And I think that you'll probably attest to that too, Amy.
Totally. And one thing I do want to say about the question of the caretaking thing is my understanding and my personal belief is it's been happening for a long time, many years, generations upon generations for women. And I think
cavemen, you cavewoman.
Yeah, a long time. But a lot of it is about survival. And it's changed over time, but it's this caretaking thing of, and this is just a theory, but that if I don't caretake you, then I lose the love and then I'm alone and then I'll die. And maybe that's not the conscious mind saying that, but I know when I get anxious because my partner and I are in an argument, I feel like I'm losing the love. It feels like I'm going to die. So there's a part of that shows up in relationship in general, as well as, in a great amount in sex. So I want to put that out there so that people don't beat themselves up about it. There's some of it that is such old programming that we can individually work with or on, and hopefully that will work on the world, but it's been here for a long time. And then, so that's one thing, is just to let people know that this is beyond you. There's individual work that you can do here, but it's such a big piece. And to know that when that feeling comes up of, I'm going to fake the orgasm so I please my partner so I don't lose them, that, what happens though is that you lose yourself, right? Someone still loses no matter what. And we choose to lose us over them. And over time, that's going to lose them too. I mean, they might not leave, but it's going to hurt the connection, and it's going to get in the way because you'll be in your head about, I've been faking orgasms, or I'm resentful because I want pleasure and I'm not getting it. And so it's a reframing. Can I say on here? Because it's a mind. It's just, it's so complicated. And that's why April and I have a job because people still feel so lost, and I get it. And just the last thing I wanted to add to what April was saying is, yes, there's, the presence and the advice that I would give to people. And one thing I would say as well that I recently had this insight about is, actually, it's not recent. I've known this for a while. It's really hard to slow down and take care of us. I don't know. Some people are really good at it. I can speak for myself, and I'm pretty sure April's on the same page. It's a lot easier to take care of someone else. Because then I get the love back and it reaffirms my worthiness. When I take care of me, my worthiness gets reaffirmed, but I really have to have a lot of patience, create that spaciousness to show up for me. And there's rewards, but they might not be as immediate. And so creating those practices of, you know what, I'm really busy. I have kids. I have a busy job, or maybe I don't, but it's just really hard. I'm not even that busy, but I don't even want to take 10 minutes for myself. But I'm going to force myself maybe 3 times a week to take 10 to 15 minutes of just letting my hands glide all over my body and staying really present with that, and just see what's there, and staying present for all the subtle sensations. It sounds, for a lot of people, I'd be like, that sounds really hard. For a lot of people, they're like, that sounds easy because you just said 10 minutes 3 times a day. I can do that. For a lot of people, it's challenging because it brings up a lot about receiving, around worthiness, around caretaking. And I think that is something that is a really important practice for us, especially as women, to take on for ourselves, no matter what's going on in our lives.
Let's talk about sexuality within a couple setting. So, April, when you were talking about your experience and heightening the sensation and blindfolds, I'm just going to say it. I was going to say like it's embarrassing, but it's not. I'm not actually embarrassed. But what came to my mind was like, that sounds like it's going to take a lot of time. Right? Yeah. It's like, this sounds like I'm going to actually have to, I don't know, put aside like an hour and plan it. And like, so, and I'm tongue in cheek right now, but I'm trying to highlight that real aspect of this, where as much as we may say sex is a priority and say it's really important, I've had conversations, because I work with a lot of women who are struggling with fertility challenges. And we talked a little bit about that in our pre-chat and how sex can become a little bit different when you're having sex for a reason at a certain time because, you have to. It's not the same as when you're having it just because you want to. But even just being in a couple, being in a relationship for a long period of time, you can kind of fall into sex scripts. I'm sure there's a better word for that, where you might end up following Hollywood, which is like about the penis and very quick within whatever, 10 to 20 minutes or whatever, and then it's done. So talk a little bit about that. I feel like this ties into that concept of presence, because depending on what sex looks like in your relationship, this would take you'd have to actually devote some time and, relax and like ease into it.
Well, Lisa, this is what I always think about. Let me tell you, you have to work for things that you care about, right? You have to. If it's a job, your children, your partner, it's not, I call it the credit debit system. If you're continually crediting, and you're never putting anything back into it. And sex it's a connection piece. And maybe not for everyone. Maybe people have different types of relationships, but let's say for sake of this discussion, we're talking about couples that a lot of times are trying to have children. And, the reason that I even found you was through my friend that was having fertility issues and trying to get pregnant. And I bring her up because she was telling me about her journey as she was going through it. And it was really hard on her relationship. For 3 years, they couldn't get pregnant. And sex became this huge chore for them. And I gave them toys. I gave them lube. I gave them funny feather things. And she was just like, nothing's working. It just, when she's ovulating, they had to have sex at that exact time. And it just wasn't fun. And the only thing I have to say is, okay, right, you have to have sex when you're ovulating in that specific time. And you know better about all of this, Lisa, than I do, to get pregnant or to not get pregnant. And I think that taking time out of that schedule to have a totally fun experience, plan it. Yes, that sounds totally gnarly that you have to plan it with your partner. I have to plan it with my partner. He has 3 daughters and I love each of them. They take up a lot of his time. So I'm like, hey, Wednesday, you don't have any daughters. Can we have sexy time? It's typically, he doesn't like planning it to the hour like I will. I put it in the joint calendar. I'm like, hey, it's sexy time. But sometimes you need to take that time and effort and put some credit into your relationship and nurture and love your partner and connect to them. And it doesn't have to be necessarily sex. Go in without expectations, but a connection. Point. The kids are asleep. Dinner's done. Actually, I do recommend for this conversation as well, doing it before dinner, because otherwise when you're full and all gassy and like not feeling hot, nobody wants to get down with one another, at least in my experience. So doing it before dinner or creating that sexy date experience, that date night with 0 expectations. I know it sounds like a lot of work. You need to put in a little work and time and effort for your partner.
And I also wanted to add to that too, that yes. And so for some people to hear the word work, they're like, not sexy. And so like April's saying, make it a sexy, lightness to it. But also one thing I see that works for a lot of people, there's this couple that we know, they've been on our podcast. We can say their names, Lisa and Chris, because they've been on our podcast many times, multiple times. They are in their 50s. They are both in their second marriage with each other. They met at Burning Man years ago. They have the most deeply beautiful connected relationship. They both have children. She has her daughter's my age, 34. She's like, I could be your mom. But they have the most juicy, alive, deeply connected relationship ever. Part of it is because they talk about everything. They're deeply connected. They share their vulnerability. Another part is they schedule sacred intimacy nights once a week. On sacred intimacy night, you never cancel unless someone's deathly sick. So if someone's just like, I'm tired, nope, you still go and you light the candles and you put on the sexy music. It doesn't mean you have penetration. This is the other thing, is to get away from the idea that sexy time has to be penetration or has to be one kind of thing. It has to be the handcuffs and the bondage or whatever. To know that, okay, we're going to schedule sacred intimacy time on Saturday night. And we're going to do it no matter what. We're going to show up because this is priority. But when we do it, we're going to check in. Where are we at now and what's available? Okay, maybe it's not penetration. Maybe we are tired. So what's available here? Maybe it's just that we, spoon naked and let our hands rub all over each other and just see what happens without the expectation of going somewhere. And that's the thing that April's talking about with the work. The expectation part of it needs to lead to this goal. It needs to lead to sex. That becomes work. When instead when we open it to the invitation of let's check in with what's present now and not be set on it going to a particular place, then it's not work anymore. But it takes, if you're talking about couples, it takes both people to be on board for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple thoughts I wanted to share. I was reading this book about relationships and marriage, and I kind of called into question. We have this idea that sex is always spontaneous. And even when we reminisce about the beginnings of a relationship when you're all hot for each other or whatever, you have this idea that it was super spontaneous. Except I bet that you, if you are a type of person that shaves your body or your legs or whatever, you probably had that done. If you're into outfits, you probably had them on. If you were into certain types of underwear, you probably wore those. So we think it's all, spontaneous. But if you're honest with yourself and you actually think back to that, young love, sexy time, it wasn't as spontaneous as you thought. You did plan a date, and sex, whether, what I'm saying. So I feel like it could be really helpful to shatter that myth that there ever was this super spontaneous, totally caught. Because I don't know if I want to be caught off guard. Sometimes I like to take a shower, man. You know what I mean? It's not, I feel like we act like it's more spontaneous than it is. And that can kind of prevent us from actually acknowledging that, no, there's nothing wrong with planning it. And I love the sacred intimacy night. There's something else that I want to hear your thoughts on this. And I'll just preface it by saying that, when I'm talking about the fertility awareness method as birth control, for example, then you find yourself, if you are, if you're a woman and you have a uterus and, you're ovulating regularly, you have to manage your fertile window. So there's a period of time each month where you can get pregnant. And if you're using the method for birth control, you have to figure out what you're going to do. So the options are basically no sex, so no penetrative sex, or nothing at all, total abstinence, or barrier methods, or alternative sex. But so there's all these options. There's a menu, right? So when I have those types of conversations, all of a sudden we're talking about quote unquote alternative sex and other ways to pleasure each other that isn't penis and vagina penetration. So my question for you, because when we talk about sex, the word sex always somehow immediately means penetration. And it's interesting, right? Because why wouldn't we consider all of the other things sex as well? So the question is, what is sex? And I just want to hear your thoughts around that.
It's whatever you individually decide it is. And I invite people who think it's one specific way to put, if you're feeling stuck or wanting more variety, to maybe consider expanding that. Think of it as a menu, as we talk about in Somatica, and the sex and relationship coaching training that I did is, your sex is a menu, and a lot of people are just eating off the kiddie menu. It's I put my finger on your clit, and then I go down you for 2 seconds, and then we kiss once, and then we have sex, and that's how it always is. Yeah, then we're done. We're good. Wait, you're bored? Why are you bored? We've been doing this for 3 years. This is great. We do this on every Tuesday. It's wonderful. People get bored, and they like variety. And so they talk about in Somatica, they talk about expanding the menu to this fully delicious gourmet menu with all these options. And the menu keeps changing. You keep adding new things, taking things away that don't work for you. So for me, my definition of sex is anything that involves intimate touch that, for me personally, it's just any sort of hands, intimate touch on the body. If I was just kiss someone, I personally wouldn't call it sex, but someone else might, and that's totally fine. So you get to decide what that is. But when we have the limitation of sex is just penetrative sex, it can create that monotony. It can create that feeling of stuckness. So I would invite people to create that menu uniquely to them, not just because I said that, right? If I'm making out's not sex to me, don't choose that's the same thing if that doesn't apply to you just because I said that. You decide and then present that to your partner. Here's what sex is to me. Here's all the fun things I want to do. It's not just these 3 things. Here's all the great things that we can do. And I want to check in every time we touch to see where I'm at, where you're at. And then we can figure out what thing we want on the menu today. And it's going to be different from tomorrow and the next day.
And maybe if sex to you means, and someone's just stuck in that penis and vagina, you can call it playtime. It's playtime. So we have fun time. So it might be just kissing all over your bodies or touching each other, or maybe a little bit of fellatio or cunnilingus. Fellatio. Or
and for the listeners who don't know what that is,
blowjobs and going down on a pussy. Or maybe trying a finger in the bum, which can be really fun. You don't know unless you try.
Well-lubed finger, everyone.
Oh, yes.
That's why I work for Uberlube.
If you don't know about Uberlube, it is the best lube. You have to check it out. And it came out way before the car company, rideshare company. So they did not take that name. So I think that, I don't know, sex could be, when I think of sex, I have to be honest with you, I think about orgasm. That's what I think about. And that's my own stuff, right?
Very goal oriented. She wants to get to that place and be the best at it.
So I'm focusing on the journey. I'm trying to focus more on the journey. And what came up for me, and I don't know how valid this is, but in my years of being sexually active, I was experimental in my early days, and I did hook up with women. And so I was counting all the folks I hooked up with, and I didn't know if I should count the women, because I was like, but it wasn't what I consider sex, right? Does it count in my numbers? So I still don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I think that sex is sex, and yeah, orgasm can be in there somewhere, I hope.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. One of the things that you kind of briefly touched on was that whole Freudian nod with the clitoral, like that being a lesser orgasm, and just that whole concept of like, and I took psychology in university, so I really, it's like you graduate to, like, the terminology is just completely, well, penis focused and highly patriarchal. But one of my passions in general is to educate and to demystify and to shatter certain myths. And especially as women, not only do we not know a lot about our menstrual cycle, but we don't necessarily know a lot about our sexual anatomy. And again, I'm always back to the basic stuff. Like, how does this work? When I was in university, it was like the first year, I think, or the second, I don't remember. I dragged my roommates. I mean, I didn't have to drag them that hard, but there was an orgasm talk. There was this woman who came, and that's funny that I said the word came, but it just worked out that way. And I had to like point it out because I thought it was funny. But so this woman came to do this talk, and I remember, like, I was sitting there probably in the front row, like wide-eyed. It was so interesting. She showed the clitoris, the actual like anatomy behind it. So if no one's ever seen the clitoris, like Google clitoris anatomy, like just to be on the safe side, because you never know what you'll find if you Google terms like that. But the actual clitoris extends quite deeply into the pelvic cavity. It's pretty big. So we often think it's just this little nub. And she showed how the clitoris fills with blood, similar to an erection. And then she talked about female orgasm and ejaculation. And I remember just being like, oh my goodness, like there's so much more than meets the eye, like literally. And it was so interesting. And it really helped me to understand, especially the role of the clitoris in the female orgasm, and why as women, we need different types of attention, and like why that story of like, you know, the woman and the man hook up in the elevator and like immediately she has an orgasm as soon as penis touches her is complete foolishness. So a question out of that. But yeah, just like, I suppose it's like part of, just share with me, I mean, I'm sure part of your role in supporting, and I'm focusing on women here, but supporting women to kind of overcome some of this is education. So what have you found to be just really impactful to kind of shatter some of those myths about how female sexuality works?
Ooh, you want to start?
Sure. I think what you're talking about definitely is the more of the truth of what's really available. Again, it's going to be a different experience for everyone, but that part about the clitoris, so the clitoris is more than just a little nub. It's a full wishbone structure that has a head, a shaft, and legs that go behind your labia majora. And so when you're touching the external part of the vulva, you're touching clitoris all over the place. It's a massive structure that has around 8,000 nerve endings, which is twice that of the penis, and is the only body part that's just designed for pleasure. That's all it does. It's fascinating. It's amazing. So I think educating people about the truth of what is available, what is really there, it just can be absolutely mind-blowing for them. And there's the part that I was speaking to earlier about we can learn all of the things, and I think they're important to learn, to know what's really there about anatomy, to know how, physiologically, how the body works, etc. And that is all on this upper level part in my head, but my body also has to understand it too, right? So I can know that I have this massive clitoral structure. Okay, yeah, I have all this pleasure. But if it's not stimulated and I'm in a way where I have the physical experience, the physiological experience of this, the power of that structure, I might believe it in my head, but my body isn't on board, right? So there's this really important thing in education with people. And with podcasting, it's a very heady experience. We're just talking to people all the time. And I work with clients, and a lot of it, people are coming to me for sex and relationship coaching more as a guide or a coach. That still is a pretty heady experience. I'll do some experiential stuff, but the experiential stuff is the gold. It's get your mind connected with your heart and your genitals. And it's easier said than done, right? So the concepts, learn about the things, learn about what is available, get the education, listen to the podcasts, take the classes, read the books, and then practice and get yourself to a point either with your own self-pleasure practice or with partners where your body starts to understand all the concepts that your brain already knows or is learning about, because you can't have one or the other. I guess you could have the physical experiences and be like, whoa, what the hell was that? Now I'm going to go learn about it. That is possible. But I think the other way around, the education is important, and it has to also go hand in hand, or at least be followed by the experiential practices. And then that's what we call being fully embodied or integrated. All of the ideas and the concepts have now been integrated when my mind, body, and spirit are all aligned, and they just know. There's a deeper knowing. And as I say that, it can change, right? As I spoke to my experience of having the abortion, I went from being really heady, not understanding sex, learning a lot about it, knowing it in my head, but not knowing my body, to holy shit, I got it. I was so embodied in 2016 for like a good 6 months. I was like, yeah, because I had just done that sex and relationship coaching. I was like, I everything that they're talking about all this juicy sex and deep connection to your genitals and like tantra, I get it in every part of my being. And then I had a trauma, and then I stopped understanding it. Now I only get it in my head again. And now I'm starting, I've been working really hard to get it back into that embodied, integrated piece. So that's my long-winded answer of it's just dynamic, and we can teach all of the tools, and the deeper work really is the practice.
And I'll add just a small touch on that. I think what's helped me is kind of exploring especially my genitals inside and out on my own. Fingers, yes, great. Toys, yes, great. I had trauma on my labia when I was 18. It was torn in half. It was a sex accident that an unlubricated condom was involved in. Hence the reason that I was really scared about looking at my genitals for a long time. I didn't want to look at them. I was ashamed of them, and I shamed myself. I was like, I'm ugly. Like my vagina's ugly. I did that. I wore that for a long time, and it caused a lot of sexual tension, and I couldn't orgasm from partners. I could only have self-induced orgasms. And it was that way for a long time until I started exploring my vulva and I started kind of touching myself. So when you're talking about anatomy, it's great to learn about anatomy. Yes. And like, wow, that clitoris is like a wishbone. I didn't know that. Where is my G-spot? Is that my G-spot? Wow, I didn't know my body could do that. And it's a journey. It is. It changes all the time. I'm 37, and from 27 to 37, I enjoy a lot of different things. The only way I've been able to learn about those things is by self-exploration and tuning in. And your partner, everybody out there, if you take away anything from this, your partner cannot bring you happiness or complete pleasure. They're not psychics either. So you have to explore yourself. If they want to explore with you, that's great as well. Nobody out there is a mind reader, and what you liked maybe when you got together with them may not be what you like now, and vice versa. So explore yourself. There's toys out there if you want to use toys, but you have fingers, so you could also use those. And toes. I don't know. I've never been able to stretch my body that way, but perhaps I'll try.
Well, I really appreciate, I feel like what you did was take us into the different levels, because I mean, I don't only live in my head, but I'm also heady. Like, I like to have an understanding, and I really appreciate, because at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. Having knowledge doesn't give you an orgasm. At some point, someone has to touch something. I think that it gives you permission, especially as a woman, to ask for something different if you have a different understanding. And sometimes we need that permission. Sometimes we need someone to give us that permission to say, like, you know what, if you're like having penis and vagina sex all the time and you're not orgasming, it's okay to do something different. Like, I give you permission to try something different. And so as we wrap up today, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for the rest of the day, because I still have like 20 questions, but I think we should wrap it up at some point so that you can get on with your lovely day. But let's talk a little bit about some of the practical things that for all the women listening. So whether, I mean, I know these are big topics, but I think we can probably sum it up. But whether you're wanting to just, spice it up, whether you're not necessarily experiencing the level of pleasure or the number. I know it's not always goal-oriented, but orgasms are fantastic. And the world would be better if everyone had more of them, in my opinion. So whether it's trying to just increase or even just to connect more deeply with your partner, or to feel more comfortable in your own skin. You mentioned, of course, that we have this book knowledge, but what really is going to make the difference is us getting in touch with our bodies, and because this is a feeling. This is about feeling, right? And identifying what feels good.
I'll say a few, and then Amy can say a few. And I think my top probably 3, and I will just reiterate kind of what I've said many times throughout this interview. Get into your body and out of your head for sure. And if that's difficult for you, do some breath work and be focused on the journey and what you're experiencing, the sensations. Use toys. Try them out. If you're scared, there are non-scary toys out there. There's a lot of very sexy looking products now. It's not big fleshy phallic dildos anymore. You don't even have to say the word dildo. You can say vibrator, because I know dildo sometimes gives a negative connotation. I think it's fun to say too. And what about trying out that whole sensation play? Try out a blindfold. If you don't want to go and buy a blindfold, go into the, get a tie, go into the closet, grab a tie. And it doesn't have to be work. It can be playful fun. You do have to put the credit into it, the system though, instead of the debit. So I think those would be my top kind of words of advice, if you will.
One thing that I realized that we haven't really touched on that I think is really important, especially for couples and partners. April's got all like the really good, like fun, sexy ways to spice it up and make things really extra fun. Because let me tell you, she's really fun. If you want to hang out with someone that's always fun, that's April. And yes, I'm very grateful to have her as my fun friend. I love you. I'm not as fun as you. So this is where maybe I shine a little bit more here, is those deep conversations. Sharing vulnerability you want deeper connection with your partner. You have to you got to talk about the hard stuff. You got to talk about all the things. What are the challenges? What are the fears? What are the hopes? What are the dreams? What's working? What's not working? Maybe don't say it not in that way. What's not working? Always start with what is working, by the way, like with some appreciation. What's good here, or what's really great? And what am I desiring more of? And opening up the doors for those conversations. Those conversations, those check-ins and the vulnerability, they create deep connection, right? The minute I share with a lover or my partner, that here's something that's really scary for me, even if it's not related to them about life. And as long as they're there and present with me, we can go into deep connection. Now, if they disregard what I say, then we have a problem. But I suggest setting aside, so we talked about sacred intimacy nights, maybe also monthly sex life check-ins. I remember hearing this from another sex educator. And so it's, what is working really well and what are we both desiring more of? It's not an easy conversation. It's very scary to have your partner say, I'm desiring more sex. I don't feel like we're having enough sex. Or, when we have sex, I don't feel super connected to you and I'm desiring more slowness and more connection. And because people create the story of, then I'm broken, I'm not enough. So creating spaciousness to speak lovingly.
And no blame there.
Not blaming.
Please don't play the blame game. Not like you never give me an orgasm. That's not what you want to go with.
Just speaking. And if you want to, we won't get too deep into it, but learn more about nonviolent communication. If you feel that you are a blamer, which most people are, honestly, I'm blaming you for that. But it's so powerful. It really is. In terms of the couples work, I honestly don't believe that we can have deep connection without opening up the doors for those kind of conversations. It's and a lot of people are not doing that. So if you feel that that's your case, this is your first deep conversation to have with someone. We need more conversations. Here's what's working, and what I'm desiring more of is more check-ins, more conversations about the hard stuff that we actually don't want to talk about. And people say, well, it doesn't feel good to talk about that. And like as if it should. Get comfortable with uncomfortable, like really, and not in maybe in every aspect of your life, but get comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations. People also think that it shouldn't feel that way when we communicate or connect with our partners, that there shouldn't be discomfort. Who told you that? Why do you think that is true? And your life is going to be a lot harder if you spend it trying to avoid the discomfort and a lot more disconnected.
Well, I can't help but think of what April said, the example that you gave with the couple, your friends, your couple friends who were struggling, obviously with infertility, which is hugely emotional and just incredibly difficult. And you were like, I gave them all the toys, I gave them everything. And she's like, it's not working. And it's like what Amy just said in terms of those deep conversations of vulnerability. You often think like, I must need a gadget. I must need a thing. And I love that you brought it back to that connection. If you want to feel more connected, then it does start with vulnerability. So yes, I love that. Well, we've touched on a lot. We could touch on a lot more. But, for the woman who's listening, who's enjoyed this conversation thus far, what is something that you'd want her to leave with today?
Oh, God, we have so many things. I think what key thing that has come up a lot is to choose you, and not to not choose anyone else at all ever, but to really powerfully choose you and create practices that are for you, even if you have limited time, whether it's some self-care practice that is connected to your sensuality and sexuality. I think that if someone does that and they do that a couple times a week for a while, that in itself will be such a game changer.
I'm going to say stop the negative self-talk. Love yourself more. Love your body, love your mind, love your hair, love your eyes, love everything about yourself. And if you feel like there's parts of you that you maybe aren't comfortable with, look in the mirror and tell yourself how much of a badass you are, and slowly start to do shifts that help you feel better. Meaning, do the self-care, do the work for yourself, take the time. But love yourself. It's start the negative self-talk that we all do, especially as women in this world today. I'm not a good enough mother. I'm not making enough money. I'm not good enough in the bedroom. I know that everyone has these moments. Just stop those, shift. For everything negative you say about yourself, say 3 nice things. I do this to my partner when we're fighting. I'm like, you just said something mean. Let's do 3 nice things now. And I do the same thing. And he always says the same ones.
I like your eyebrows.
Yes, I like your butt. So I let him get away with those things sometimes. So it's just the negative self-talk. We all really need to work on that. And if you are an empowered woman that's constantly giving yourself positive feedback, good on you. Teach others to do the same because it's so important.
Okay, I have one follow-up. Okay, so the next time, so for all the listeners, like the next time you're like in an intimate moment with your partner and you're literally thinking whatever you're thinking, like, oh my gosh, I forgot to shave this morning, or, oh, do I smell, or whatever, like whatever. Tell us what to do to get out of the head and into the body.
Come back to the touch, and just start. This is why April said it's a meditation. You start to notice that your mind kicks in, and you're not even paying attention to the fingers on your body, on your nipple, on your clitoris, or whatever. And you start to think that the insecurities of, am I taking too long? Am I going to orgasm? Did I shave? Or about what you're having for breakfast tomorrow. Notice that train of thought and take up a meditation practice that's separate from sex. Honestly, if this is hard for you, it's hard for most people. And come back to the touch. Okay, what are the sensations in my body? What does it feel like to have this hand on my skin? Not what are they thinking and what are they feeling and what am I thinking in my mind, but really just what's here present in my body, and keep coming back. And it's a dance. You'll go into your mind and come back to your body. Oh, there's my mind again. Come back to my body. Just keep on practicing and it will get easier.
I still have so much. I get so caught up in my smells. I do. I'm so sensitive to smell. And I feel like yesterday I got off an airplane after and I don't wear underwear. Another shame-free confession for you, Lisa. And I was a little sweaty down there. And I'd been traveling all day. And I went home and my partner was like, maybe you should shower. I was like, I don't feel like it. It's midnight. I just been traveling all day. I'm like, maybe you should deal. And so that happened. And I'm like, I love myself. And yes, sometimes there's body things. I know that I showered in the morning. I'm not, like peeing all over myself or something. Like I'm very clean, hygienic human. And sometimes your smells shift and change depending on what you're doing. And that's okay. And if you do, though, as you know, BV could be a thing. If you feel like you might have a different smell, because sometimes I can tell when my pH balance of my vagina is off, and then I get a little self-conscious. But you can shift that easily. There's Femdopolis. That's a great pill. You can stick some garlic up there. There's a lot. Then you taste like pizza.
Not willing to put garlic in my vagina. I'm sorry. It's not happening.
So I think that definitely focus on yourself being awesome and a badass and not on what you think you lack, because we're all good and they can deal with it. If you want to get down and sexy, then love my smells and my taste and my feeling in my skin.
And
Yes.
And it's okay to make a request. Hey, honey, how about that shower before I put my mouth on your genitals? And if you don't want to take the shower, April, then maybe your genitals don't get the mouth.
And that's what happened last night. And I was fine with that. I was like, I'm dealing.
Yes. But overall, it's like less in the head, more in the body.
That's what she was really saying. Yes.
Yes, that is a long-winded story now for you.
Yeah. Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I always love when I get a chance to interview too. I've done it a few times, like I've got a couple, but it was great to have both of you. And so where can the listeners go to learn more about you, to learn about your different programs, podcasts, store, et cetera, et cetera?
So you could go to purepleasureshop.com. That's Amy's store. All the toys, all the books, all the things are on there. We have Shameless Sex podcast at gmail.com. If someone wants to reach out to us just to say hi or answer a question, we're there and we get to it as soon as we can. They can also follow us on all the iTunes / Google Play / all the ways to listen to podcasts. YouTube, we're at Shameless Sex, and our website is shamelesssex.com, and our Instagram is Shameless Sex Podcast. So just look up Shameless Sex and you'll pretty much find us. We're half naked with a banner strapped across us. You'll see us. And thank you, Lisa. The work you're doing is so valuable, so important, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you today. I loved it. You want to add, Amy?
I think you covered it. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for being here. It was awesome.
All right. Ciao.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/271. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with April and Amy. It was such a treat to have an opportunity to chat with them. I have been a guest on their podcast on 2 separate occasions. I'll link the 2 episodes of mine on the Shameless Sex podcast in the show notes page. So you'll find that over at fertilityfriday.com/271. But yes, it was so nice to have them on the show and talk about one of the topics that I often try to bring up on the show whenever I get a chance, which is just that idea of sexuality and how female sexual response is kind of ignored in a lot of our portrayals, whether it's media portrayals or just our general understanding of what quote unquote sex is supposed to look like. And so whenever I get an opportunity, I like opening up that conversation because it does, as a fertility awareness educator, when I'm supporting clients to learn fertility awareness and use fertility awareness as a birth control method, this often comes up because it's like there's times when you just have to get creative. So every couple is different. And if you're planning to use fertility awareness as your primary method of birth control, it involves a shift in thinking. First of all, it involves communication with your partner, at least on some level. So again, every couple is very different. Some couples extensively discuss and, determine how they're going to approach this. And, their male partner in this case would be very involved. And in other cases, not so much. So it really depends on where you are, and it depends on what is comfortable for you, for example. So some couples are comfortable with condoms, or with avoiding sex altogether during that time, or using alternative barrier methods like diaphragms or cervical cap, or combination. Withdrawal, something we talk about a lot on the show, but other couples are not comfortable. Perhaps they're just not comfortable with taking the risk, because ultimately, if you have protected sex on a fertile day, you are relying on the effectiveness of the method that you choose. So if you have sex with a condom on a fertile day, then you're relying on the efficacy of condom. Condoms have a high efficacy rate, up to 98% effective when used correctly. So it just depends on the comfort level of the individuals involved. But with that said, the reason that it kind of comes into this conversation about sexuality and what the definition of sex looks like is often we think of sex as male and female, penis and vagina intercourse, and that's kind of what we think of as, equates sex. But if you're trying to find creative ways to manage your fertile window, one of the things that we've talked about in a number of different episodes, I'll link the previous, I've done a few episodes specific to sex and sexuality, similar to the topics that we were talking about today. And in some of those previous interviews, we talked about how for many couples, avoiding penis and vagina intercourse during the fertile window, but opting for other types of sexual activity, lots on the menu, lots of menu options. Many women in particular find it to be just extremely enjoyable, and it can really enhance that intimacy because, every woman is different. So there's no one rule of how every single woman is going to respond sexually. But when it comes to sexual expression, we're different to men. We have a clitoris, and it is one of the most sensitive parts of the body, and it has thousands of nerve endings. And it's well established that for most women, in order to reach orgasm, clitoral stimulation in some form is required. And so switching it up can be a great way to even just acknowledge that the difference in how the female body is organized, and just give an opportunity to experience pleasure in different ways. So whenever I have an opportunity to talk about that, I think it's just a great topic to just bring up and to raise awareness about, and just really open it up for discussion. And I know that, a lot of you listen to this podcast episode and have conversations with your partners and your girlfriends and, whoever really of interest, but to kind of just talk about these things. And that's why I love podcasting in general. And I love to be able to have conversations like this in a public way, so that we can just increase awareness and just keep those conversations going. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't enjoy sexual pleasure? Who doesn't enjoy orgasms? And as women, who doesn't enjoy the possibility of multiple orgasms, right? So it's worthwhile to talk about these things, especially on air. So if you enjoyed this episode, or if you know somebody in particular who you think may benefit from today's episode, make sure to share the link. So fertilityfriday.com/271. I'd love to hear what you think, what your experience has been, how you manage your fertile window, if that has made any difference or change in your relationship or not at all. We'll be talking about this in the Fertility Friday Facebook group. So you can find us over at fertilityfriday.com/community. I'll put a post in there when this episode goes live. And otherwise, I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today. If you are somewhere on your own fertility awareness journey, and you're either thinking of using fertility awareness as your primary birth control, or you're, planning to conceive in the future, wanting to optimize your cycles in advance, or somewhere in between, maybe you've been trying for a little while and you're wanting to see if there's anything you can glean from your menstrual cycles, I've cultivated a number of resources for you. We can head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me to find out the ways that we can work together. I'm opening up the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery shortly. The registration will be opening shortly, so stay tuned for that. We'll be having our next session starting the very first day of October, so we're actually starting quite soon. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. There's links for the 10-week group program. You can get on the waiting list so that you'll be the first to know when I open up registration for that. If you're looking for more personalized support directly from me, I do have a 4-month coaching program, and you can also, join the waiting list for that. So I open up spots whenever I have spaces available. For the past several months, the program has actually been full, so I've started a waiting list, but you can certainly, again, join the waiting list. And once there are openings available for either program, I will absolutely email you and let you know. I've also cultivated my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. You can learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost of working with me in one of my live group coaching or one-on-one coaching programs. This program is the most comprehensive fertility awareness self-study program available. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. And with that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with me today. I hope you're enjoying your summer. I know that I have been enjoying some relaxing family time, taking in the sun and relaxing with friends. And it's been just a wonderful, wonderful summer with the kiddos and everything like that. So I do hope that you're enjoying your summer wherever you are in the world. I hope that you are getting some sunshine, some vitamin D. Lord knows I need more vitamin D given that I live in Canada. So I've been soaking it up. You'll always find me like sitting in the direct sunlight and soaking up my vitamin D. But I do hope that you've been enjoying your summer, and I appreciate you for tuning into the show, for supporting the show, for sharing the show with your friends. The word of mouth has been incredible. That's really how Fertility Friday has grown, and that is how more and more people had the opportunity to discover fertility awareness and how important it is for health, and to discover the podcast and just kind of keep the energy going. Because, I envision a world where all women do understand how their body and their menstrual cycles work. And it's really up to us to make that happen by continuing to talk about it and continuing to spread the word about it. So thank you once again. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.